So here we are. You've seen this quick panorama of this extraordinary landscape of very high-tech greenhouses, reclaimed land, and the pop-up village of the festival. And here is the sign to the dome. And if you pan around to me and look at the entrance, you can see it's a very spectacular structure of about 1700 square meters or 16,000 square feet. And this is where we've been busy the last weeks looking for projects to bring into the space that represent in different ways what the future rural economy that connects the city is going to be about. So firstly, when you come into the dome, one of the things I'm most proud of and makes me happiest is this wall of herbs. So these are all very fresh and very beautiful smelling herbs from the bio farm. And this is what changes your mood as you come from the outside into the dome. This is the soils area, and if you remember, I just told you about the beautiful entrance with the herbs. The other thing we did was to search for the whole of Shanghai for the best and healthiest soil, which we've collected and put into these bowls. And the entrance to the show is, we invite everybody to smell deeply of the healthiest soil in the greater Shanghai bioregion, and that kind of reinforces the notion that this is the measure of quality and a healthy life, not the money and not the technology and everything else. So everybody, all the thousands of people coming in here over the next days, will smell decent soil, often for the first time in their lives. And it's all about the fact that we measure value and the success of the economy and how well a community or a city is doing by the condition of the soil rather than by old-fashioned indicators such as money or GDP. And having smelt the soil and said, yeah, that's more important than money as a measure of how we're living, we then made this kind of simple wall of 10 ways to make soil healthier, ranging from the ancient studies of soil in Chinese culture through to the present day, how the scientists have kind of made very simple to-do lists that any farmer or any mayor or any citizen can understand. So, in one 5-meter stretch, all the different answers you might need for making the soil healthier. The other part of the soil story are these 5 pictures, which are to reinforce the idea that we people are not separate from the soil and nature, we're all part of the same living system. And so here the first picture is a bacterium in a speck of soil made by a scientist called Simon Sublime, who has amazed the world by discovering just how much vitality there is in a small piece of soil. The next picture shows nature's internet, the way that trees and plants of all kinds have evolved these incredible under-soil networks of communication without any energy or copper or special materials. And we compare that to man's internet, which is fantastic, but not as clever as nature's internet, in our judgment. And then the fourth picture is a picture of how nature replenishes itself, the different ways in which the tiniest plants put out filaments into the world to communicate with their context. And then the fifth picture in this kind of opening sequence is to say, yeah, our bodies and the bodies of the earth are not so different after all. They're all connected, and so therefore it's not a bad idea if we start to make those connections in the way we organize our daily lives. These plants take pollutants out of the water, and here is a picture of this same exact system being used on a larger scale. Just one of many inspiring examples of how ecosystems such as a river can be made healthy again without too complicated an intervention, and it can happen quite quickly. Even when you have a ruined river system, it can be brought back to life within a single generation. So nothing we're talking about here is about some magical future. It can all be done starting now. So this part of the exhibition is all about making things but not just out of random materials, but working with nature's materials that exist in the landscape. And the theme here is that we can, of course, continue to make things in the next economy, but we don't have to make nature sicker in the process. We're showing you some work from France. So here is a designer and a scientist in the place called the Camargue, which is a famous biodiversity reserve and wetlands, collecting from the surface of this land algae, which for most of the time just seem like weeds or have no value except to be an obstacle to normal farming. What they do is to collect the algae, put them through a process and create biofilaments and make 3D printed bioplastics, some of the examples of which you can see here. If every region in the world took plants from the land, which are basically freely available, and turned them into objects for food packaging or bottles or whatever, you could remove that problem very quickly and have an alternative economy of naturally made materials at the same time. So this is called Atelier Luma, and there's a lot of information from them online. The happiest making part of the show for me is this table to do with fermentation, in which the fermentation crew, led by Francesca, are demonstrating the incredible variety of qualities and tastes and smells that you can get by bottling fresh fruits and vegetables. And it's all about a science and an art that has been with us for hundreds of generations, but only in very recent times has it been replaced by industrial food. And our basic proposition is we can reconnect with practices and with traditions that brought pleasure and nutrition for hundreds of generations in the past, and we can then reinvent them for this new age. So this is Francesca, who's a professor and also an expert on all things fermentation, to explain what we're looking at on the table.
The majority of the things are vegetables, any kind of vegetables, from cabbage, like sauerkraut, to sweet potatoes over here, and mushroom, beetroots. You can ferment whatever you like, and different kind of things that we get from the farms around to have something to taste with our sourdough bread. And this mother yeast it comes from Alaska and it has 100 years. It means that for the past 100 years, these things has become bread and bread and bread all and over again. So when you're eating something like this, you're eating biodynamic flour from one of our farms, and you're eating something that has been passed through hands for 100 years, which is, I believe, much more than the age of everybody present in this TV show.
So you heard Francesca talking about the foods that came from farms near where we are in the Dome. This is a story of one particular farm that we all have grown to love, the Bio Farm in Shanghai. It's kind of almost an urban farm. But the reason for us telling the story so prominently is that to make the point that farms are not just factories which make food, they're also social systems, ecological systems, and so every region needs a farm with all these different connections. So you're starting with the map of activities that you see at the Bio Farm, and then in the next picture we said, okay, as Bio Farm develops over the future, what kind of other activities could it engage in that are not just being a factory for food? And you have all the work that they do with children, and I think we all feel that we just have to reconnect with food and farming to understand where it's going next, and the children is the best way to do that. Then on the third picture, we had this discussion with Bio Farm about, well, how does every region in China or the world have such a farm? If we need it, which we do, how are we to achieve that? You can't just mass produce them. They're not like a car or a product. They're living systems. So it's quite a challenge, and the discussion for the whole of this exhibition and this movement is, how can we replicate the spirit and the kind of qualities of an urban Bio Farm without trying to make them the same everywhere? And then the conclusion of our debate, you can see in this fourth picture, is actually there are millions of farms already in China that are collaborating in little ways. why can't we be, as designers or as organizers, provide platforms to help them, make it easier for them to collaborate if they share these broad values to do with the health of the soil and the health of the people being the same thing. So here in the feeding zone is perhaps the smallest, but one of my favorite and most amazing exhibits is these 4 phones are all live streaming farmers from different parts of China, telling us about their crop, their oranges, their mangoes, their sugarcane. And although it looks small and normal to most of my friends here in China, in Europe this is like an incredible revolution, because one of the secret ingredients we've all thought for 20 or 30 years is if only the farmers and the people in the city could communicate directly, there would be less misunderstanding, we'd have a better relationship, farmers would be treated more fairly, the people in the city would be more interested in food. And here with these rural live streaming platforms, those direct connections are being made here and now. So this brings us into the 4th zone of the dome, the urban rural journey, and it's all about clothing. But as we saw with food and fermentation, we're not trying to give people lectures about replacing the global fashion system. Rather, what we're doing is to say there are qualities of our relationship with clothes and with fiber that have been lost in the industrial system. And so what we're doing now is saying, how can we give people that sense of reconnection with the qualities of fiber, looking after things through time, repairing them. And so this wonderful, what is it? It's an event basically called a Repair Cafe, which the Shanghai Institute of Visual Arts and the professors and all sorts of members of the public are mending things, repairing bits of garments, and basically touching made stuff for the first time in a long time. And we are not going to give people lectures about how they should stop buying bad fashion. We're just saying start to love fiber, and then the rest of the answers, I think, we're pretty confident will emerge from that. So please come, welcome, bring your sock with a hole in it and have it mended at the Repair Cafe. If you love fiber, if you love soil being healthier, if you love the qualities of the world before we messed it up with industrial processes, then the question becomes, what sort of fiber can be obtained for our clothes that is healthy for the soil? I don't have all the answers, but we can show here that there are people all over the world looking at so-called soil-friendly fiber or climate-friendly fiber, and the answers they come up with will be very different from place to place. So one of my favorites in California is this network called Fiber Shed, which basically organizes together everybody connected to sheep's wool into a network which is limited in space and time. And the one sentence answer to sustainable fashion is that sustainable fashion is going to be local fashion. Everything else is going to be some kind of obstacle to making that journey harder. So that's the big picture of fashion. Once we rebalance city and rural and think of them as one place rather than two, we face the question, how are we to bring life back to the villages that have been abandoned or neglected over the last years? And so what's rather fabulous to me is that I've discovered people in China and people in Italy are doing similar work in taking different approaches, and that's what you'll see in this part of the exhibition. How do we bring life back to a place that looks maybe abandoned, only old people still living there? But the process that they carry out, and which you see also in China, is not to believe what your eyes show you, but to look for signs of hidden activities and people with skills or buildings with potential. So I love this image of the hidden assets and what looks from a distance like an abandoned town. But once you start talking to people, doing your history, studying the geology, studying the culture, all sorts of kind of hidden qualities re-emerge that have been there. And then the question becomes, how do we turn this potential? People with a cooking skill, people who have stories to tell, people who make things with clothes and so on, how can they be given livelihoods so that economic as well as touristic life comes back to the village. And so I'm standing here with Andrea Paoletti, my friend from Italy, who's the leader of this project called Wonder Grottoli. And just in 2 or 3 sentences, Andrea, these numbers over the town, what do they represent in terms of the work you've been doing over the last period?
So they represent places and people connecting through the project. It is a school for village host. So what we have done in the last year is to create a school where people can come and train and to meet the local community and to understand how to run a community and how to host the tourists in a village and to become and live like a local.
Airbnb in China have started a similar project here called training villagers to become not just hosts of, like in a tourist sense, but also to connect visitors with heritage attractions, with food activities, with farming and so on. So this is the, in Zhangyan prefecture, the first of their experiments. And I think we're very hopeful that the projects in Italy, as a school for village hosts, as being the pioneer, we can so easily add on more and more activities so that it's not just about the tourism industry of the past, but genuinely economic transformation. I wanted on that subject just to mention a couple of these projects that I've seen here in Shanghai in the last months, in which designers have said, how can we connect city people with nuts being grown in the countryside? How can we connect them with how to grow oils or with other activities? And so what started off as booking something on a website, you can now have an app that just press a button and instantly you're connected to somebody in a village who will get some money for teaching you about their skill. And this kind of list of words here is just an incredible example of the different activities that design people are beginning to explore by way of the potential for the future. So these villages have an amazing future, particularly if we stop just thinking of them as passive tourist destinations and more as centers of new economic life in their own sense. We've seen in the previous 5 zones all sorts of activities to do with food and fermentation and fiber, the new hospitality, new ways of moving around, making things with natural materials. Hundreds, if not thousands, of experiments all over China, but also in other places, that we've put together in this space just to show it's already happening. But the question I think a lot of people will have is, okay, I would like to learn more. How do I do that? And that's why in this final zone we put together, I think, I must say, a rather remarkable collection of projects and institutions in different parts of the world where you can learn about the land on the land, not going to some institution. But all of these projects are people who said they don't want to learn about something in a university and then they go and apply it somewhere else. This is in Taiwan, a kind of converted factory. This is in South Korea, in the street markets, learning how to bring the food traditions back to life. Social innovation in Myanmar. A whole earth nature school in Japan. A field school in Thailand where designers go and work with craftspeople. One of the many amazing initiatives here in Shanghai called Green Initiatives, which have everything from food projects to e-waste. An expedition between an English school and a Chinese organization about the transition to an ecological civilization. People walking around the world as we speak, trying to understand where the interesting new experiments are happening. A farmer institute also here in Shanghai, and so on. If you're motivated and inspired by what's happening in the Dome, there are many, many different places for you to go and connect with people like yourself who are learning in new ways about new subjects. So that's basically where the journey ends in the Dome. I hope that you've been excited by what you've seen and now go and get involved in something for yourself.